Ahmed for presenting. And could we maybe briefly just test the sound and if Ilham is audible to us? And if she can hear us, Ilham, قادرة تسمعينا? She should be in the chat. Otherwise, I'm also going to give ممتاز جميل. Okay, ممتاز. Okay. بالضبط. For now, you can go ahead, Majda. Thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you, and also thank you, Ilham. We're very honored to have her here. And join us, I will read now a brief excerpt of Ilham Malik's research paper. Sudan has been experiencing one of the most complex humanitarian crises in the contemporary world since the outbreak of the war on April 15, 2023. This crisis is the result of the intersection of armed conflict, economic collapse, and the fragmentation of state institutions. The consequences have been devastating. Millions of people are now deprived of access to food, healthcare, shelter, and protection. At the same time, the humanitarian system itself has been severely disrupted. Humanitarian assistance, which should be guided by the principle of humanity first, has become increasingly politicized. In some cases, it is used as a tool of pressure and control. Aid convoys are obstructed, deliveries of food and medicine are delayed, and humanitarian supplies are looted and resold in local markets. As a result, millions of civilians are denied their most basic rights and dignity. The most vulnerable groups have become the greatest burden of this crisis, have borne the greatest burden of this crisis. Persons with disabilities, older persons, women, and children face severe food insecurity, limited access to essential services, and increased risks of violence, including gender-based violence, particularly in displacement settings. The scale of this crisis is immense. Approximately 10 million people are internally displaced, while more than 4.3 million have fled across the borders as refugees. Over 21 million people are experiencing food insecurity, and more than 26 million are in need of humanitarian assistance. Women are disproportionately affected. Households headed by women are significantly more vulnerable and are far more likely to experience insufficient access to food. At the same time, children are facing rising rates of acute malnutrition, increased mortality, and limited access to healthcare and nutrition services. In several regions, including Darfur and South Kordofan, cities are facing siege-like conditions. Humanitarian access is severely restricted, supply chains are disrupted, and the risk of famine is increasing. The United Nations has repeatedly called for urgent international action to prevent further deterioration. The conflict has also been accompanied by grave violations. These include widespread malnutrition and hunger-related deaths, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and sexual violence used as a weapon of war. Millions have been forcibly displaced, often into conditions where basic services are non-existent. Violations also affect humanitarian operations directly. Aid is delayed or distributed in discriminatory ways, further excluding those most in need. Those developments point to a deeper structural crisis. What we are witnessing in Sudan is not only a failure of humanitarian delivery, but a crisis of governance, justice, and accountability. Addressing this situation therefore requires more than emergency aid. It requires an integrated approach that combines humanitarian response with protection mechanisms, accountability frameworks, early recovery, and long-term development strategies. This is a short excerpt of a much longer paper. That's it from my side.
Thank you for presenting, Majda. And I will continue with my first question, which goes to at least our three present leaders here, or panelists, which is starting from our critique that we, human rights defenders, people working on issues in Sudan, have been very critical of how the international response has looked like in the past 3 years, and how little civilian voices have been heard. But if we could briefly, from also your different areas of expertise, mention what have these responses actually look like? Like what has been done in the past few years, and what is where are we failing right now? And I would start with you, Meg, and you guys are close to the mic. Yeah. And I would start with you first, May, and then I would go to you, Mo, and then to Marina last.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's a bit late now because most of the people I see them getting tired, even me. Long day. From my perspective as Ghana Group for Peace and Development, we had a lot of problems that the civilians are facing. One of them that the shrinking the space of funding, and also sometimes recognition of the grassroots organizations. And the third thing is also the international community has limited sometimes when it comes to fund. And in the case of Sudan, because we are in this war, there are a lot of problems that are happening in the ground. People, they don't have knowledge about it, and most of the people, they are far away. They're assuming that we are just driving day by day and we are still surviving. But this sometimes is also harming not to serve the community while we are sitting here talking about peace and human rights issues, when sometimes some organizational funding is harming the people. For example, the case of Sudan, that the international community was not recognizing the conflict in Sudan in such a way like Ukrainian and Syrian, and that is also one of the big neglecting part. That is, as a civilian, we try to filling that part with our community and our people, like the emergency room and neighborhood community, and also some of the grassroots organizations. But we are limited because of the funding. We are limited because of also that is the wars have taken like 3 years. People has been also displaced from place to place, and also the cut of the internet has also a huge impact of that. And the third thing that is also the targeting of human rights defenders, women organizations, hateful speech, and it's a lot of different phases of conflict and different phases of increasing the war times and also putting people in danger, those who are working in the ground. From our side as Ghana, we try to maintain peace, and we try to maintain also very high security and to come when it's coming to serve the community. And that is also take a lot of energy and process with a lower capacity. And the lower capacity, that means that these people, they have to displace from place to place, and something difficult to gather all the people together. And it's also difficult to finance all these people because sometimes the donors have like limitations, and we cannot go beyond this limitation. This is why we had some direct and indirect conversation sometimes, but we failed to convince them, because they said this is a policy, and also when it comes to Sudan, sometimes it's a bit hard to get money and to get support for the community, and also to raise these voices of the people. This is why we try our best here in Germany and other EU countries to do a lot of lobbying and advocacy to advocate for those people, to advocate for the voices of the people, that to be heard, and also Sudan should be in the first line when we're speaking about the crisis. It's not being visible for the last 2-3 years, only the first week or 2 weeks when the war is broke in Sudan. Now when we see Gaza, we see Ukraine, it's not a competition. Yeah, war is war, and violation is violations, but we need to be also considered as a human being.
Yeah, and now to you.
Thanks a lot. I mean, I think it's maybe a good starting point. I know this has actually been a part of the discussion in the workshop earlier today, but maybe let me start with an anecdote for people who used to read Alice in Wonderland. There was a certain segment which is known about Humpty Dumpty, who fall from the wall, and Alice asked Humpty Dumpty, saying, "How can a word can have two meanings?" And Humpty Dumpty said, "If I have power, it shall be." I think one of the biggest issues with the conflict in Sudan is how we define civilians. And as I said earlier this afternoon, there's a legal, standpoint of how we define civilians, but there's also a political point about how we define civilians. This is a war. It's not a civil war, of course. I think it came up earlier many times that it's not, Sudanese woke up one day and decided that we hate each other and just kind of kill each other in bed. This is a war against civilians. From day one until today, I can easily say the safest job in Sudan at the moment is to be a fighter. The riskiest status and the job to be is to be a civilian. And that is very telling about the nature of the conflict itself. I mean, now we can come to the question about the civilian voice, which is I really appreciate even the title of this conversation about centering Sudanese voices. Because this is a voice being hijacked not through the war, I mean, even before that. We have seen this as an accumulation since 2018, like 19, after the revolution in Sudan, when I can say, right, diplomats, including from Germany, but other countries as well, when they will be like, well, we don't know who we can talk to. So that you Sudanese always have different opinions about every single thing. My answer is, isn't that democracy? Like, it's the whole point of living in a society where people have different voices and opinions. Of course, right, there could be other ways of doing that very differently. Right now we are in a situation when this war and actors and enablers, the international community, have actively hijacked the civilian voice to even curate the narrative about what's happening in Sudan. The amount of time I can say about going to meetings when I have to talk about, oh, but it's the Islamists, right? It's the terrorists, like jihadists, and this and this and this and that. But let's go back to the reality about what's happening on the ground. Regardless of what narrative, how we approach this conflict to be, but there are things right now happening. What are you doing about it? Can you invite, just the conversation, just think that the remark about, people coming and traveling from Egypt, for example. How many Sudanese can actually get a visa to come to Germany? Even in other places, like in Kenya or Uganda or anywhere else, right? There are ways of bringing these voices. I think if there's one key ask to push for, is the investment in the diverse civilian voices. That they can be brought together, they can fight each other. Bring us in a room, we can fight for a day, and we're gonna walk out that door and we're gonna be, okay, maybe there is something we can agree with at some point or not. But I think it is a very important start to approach addressing the conflict and for also observers to understand what's happening.
Also for already bringing in this framing and this critique of the so-called civil war, because it is a war against civilians. And now Chima.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you also for having me, for the invitation, and I'm sorry that I missed the workshops. I couldn't agree more to what you just said, and that was also what I was about to say. This is a war against civilians. But I would go even a step further. It was said in the introduction that it's now 40 years since I have been first in Sudan in January '86. And basically, these are 40 years where I don't know anything else than war in Sudan. And I think this is often forgotten because sometimes I wonder how people from Darfur, from South Kordofan, from South Sudan anyway, from Brunei feel if they hear 3 years of war, because they have been at war for so many years already. So realities are very different also in Sudan, and I think this is also what we have acknowledged. But what these wars have all in common is that it has been wars and are wars of Sudanese governments, so-called governments, against their people. This is what basically many outsiders do not understand. So often, of course, and you know it better than me, they come with this argument, oh, this is all too complex, give us a kind of simple answer. I love these wonderful interviews in radios where they tell us, where they ask, give us the situation in Sudan, the reasons for the war, and the way out in 3 minutes. And this is reality. So this is not possible. We all know that. So all these 40 years, basically what I have been involved in is listening. I remember that I was first reading before I went to Sudan about Sudan. Then I went after half a year and I knew all answers to the Sudanese problems, all of them. Because I was reading so much and because I'm an intellectual. After I returned from Sudan, I told my bosses I can't do my job. I don't understand anything. And I said it many times, even today we all say we are still confused only on a higher level. But we stay on, at least some of us. Others, they just give up. You know about the fatigue, you know about so many other wars around the world, and you know about the problem that even today it's much more difficult to get people showing empathy for the most serious atrocities which are being done in Sudan, but even in other countries. So people are getting used and are not defending human rights any longer. You know it all. We know what happens in Palestine, we know what happens now even in Iran, in Ukraine and so many other places. So I feel that we deal with the same kind of patterns and have been dealt with them in all these decades. And because people do not understand what is really going on, because they don't take the time to listen, because they don't put the Sudanese people at the center, they come up with completely wrong kind of solution. Solution comes from inside, we all know that, not from outside. Outsiders have interests, and it becomes more and more obvious where these interests are. So, to me, as long as, and you were saying also this nonsense of saying, Sudanese civil society is so divided, so we can't deal with them. I always think that we in Germany would be asked to speak with one voice as civil society. Just imagine the spectrum we have here in Germany. So this is the biggest nonsense we can think of. But the other problem also is that worlds are apart. For instance, we have a network of German organizations here focusing on Sudan, and advocacy on Sudan, but only 3 of these organizations work with Sudanese diaspora. One of them is and the other 2 are here, also the co-organizers of this event. And all the others, they don't. It's complicated, they are so divided, even here and within our network. And I think this is a part of the tragedy also. So it's not only governments, but it's also civil societies, international NGOs, Sudanese NGOs, grassroots, where they are completely worlds apart. And this has to be changed if we really would like to do a difference.
I love speaking with you guys because you already summarized so many of the follow-up questions and things. I feel like we can immediately get into the discussion. But I would also briefly like to give Ilham the word. And I think we can ask you, Ilham, what have been the challenges that you have faced in your work in the last 3 years specifically, and also, what has your experience been? What have the challenges been?
أنا ممكن أعيد السؤال بنفسي. فيعني شنو التحديات اللي واجهتك في ال3 سنين اللي فاتت في شغلك في أبحاثك وكمان تجاربك؟ تفضلي.
وأنا يعني تعرفت على مجدي في المعتقل، حتى كنت معتقلة سياسيا، والأستاذة مي كانت مشتغلة من معلمتنا في 2012. كنا 45 يوم في المعتقل. شفنا كثير من العذاب والاضطهاد اللي يعرفوا أهلنا. كان معانا 19 امرأة.
إلهام معلش أنا بس حوقفك ثانية. إلهام معلش هل ممكن تشغلي السماعة؟ إذا لا حنقرأ جوابك اللي كان أنت رسلتيه كنص، لكن أنا حترجم الفقرة. هل ممكن تجربي؟
أطلع السماعة ولا أشغلها؟
لو سمحت طلعي السماعة لأنه ما قدرت نسمعك بوضوح. I was just saying that we can't really hear Ilham that well, so I was asking.
إذا تبس
اتكلمي بالعربي؟
طيب أنا يعني بشكر الأستاذة مي والمجموعة معاها سايقين في الوسع، وبعرف نفسي أكثر. أنا قابلت أستاذة مي في المعتقل، كنا نساء سياسيات وناشطات اجتماعيا 19 امرأة، ويعني حسينا عذاب شديد ده قبل 2012
شكرا إلهام. معلش عشان هنا بس تترجم.
أساسا الأولى من سودانيات السلام والسلام. سودانيات بتجمع مجموعة من النساء بنختلف في آراء وأفكار، لكن في النهاية كلنا جمعتنا لا الحق بن عبد السلام. تم تأسيس سودانيات السلام.
Could you turn the audio on so she hears me the chat?
30 أبريل
أستاذ إلهام تقدر تسمعيني كده؟ She still can't hear me. I think maybe please write a message in the chat that we'll have to read the answer because we need continuous translation. I think sometimes it's a bit difficult when one starts to talk, one forgets the process of the translating. And she would need to hear me speak so I can tell her that we need to stop in order to translate.
بدون مجموعة من المنظمات المجتمع المدني.
أستاذ إلهام قدرت تسمعيني؟ كده؟ قدرت تسمعيني؟ قدرت تسمعيني؟ عيني كده معلش لأنه إحنا محتاجين أول حاجة لازم بس لما نديك أنا إشارة نوقف الترجمة عشان منى تقدر تترجم لأنه لازم تكون متتالية. ولو سمحت إذا ممكن تركزي على ال3 سنين اللي فاتت بس عشان الزمن مختصر وعشان إحنا نقدر نتوجه كده.
بس إنه عندي حاجة مهمة يعني إحنا أساساً عاملين شبكة فمحتاجين لدعم من المجتمع الإقليمي والدولي.
تفضلي.
الاشتراك بيننا كشبكة
just to translate that.
وبعدها والدعم المادي ونكون جزء أساسي من توصيل الإغاثة للجهات الفئات المستهدفة.
شكرا لك. هنا بس عشان نترجم من هنا لو سمحتي. شكرا.
I think she said that is one of the things that, if I catch it very well, that is she is from Women Initiative. They started one of the challenges that they're facing, that the humanitarians were being not distributed in an equal way, and also some people was facing a lot of hungers, and also one of the challenges that they face, that this community, women community, that she is part of it, is who's not being recognized, and also they have been fighting to support the community, but this is one of the big challenges that they don't have way to fund when it's coming to humanitarian crisis.
طيب نمرة 2
إلهام أظن إنه منى حتقرأ جوابك وبعدين إحنا حنرجع لك مرة ثانية. أيوة.
The part where she already said, because there was a lot of communication, I will start. Over the past years, I have been engaged in humanitarian and human rights advocacy in Sudan, focusing on women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. My work has included documenting violations, raising international awareness, and collaborating with local women-led and youth initiatives to improve humanitarian access for marginalized groups. The main challenges have been limited international response, politicization of aid, restricted access to affected areas, marginalization of local actors, and risks of corruption and misallocation of assistance.
Thank you. And after this, I would go to my next question. We have been, in our preparation, talking a lot about accountability and also about the glaring disparity that we have seen for Sudan. Because while there are, first of all, thank you for mentioning this, Marina. This is not, there have been crises and conflicts in Sudan for the past 40 years, but not at this scale. And not to this level of like structural destruction and also strife. I can't even quote the number of internally displaced people anymore or people displaced outside because it's absurd. And like also we're thinking about how many people have been displaced over multiple times. And for my first question, I would like to ask you why is there this discrepancy? Where is this like lack of response coming from on especially a level of international actors? And I would still like to start with you, May, because you have been in conversation here. Why is there so little? Why has there been so little political movement for Sudan on international level?
I think one of the things that we, as Sudanese, we analyze this ignoring of the conflict in Sudan or neglecting it is kind of also kind of racism, discriminations, because when it comes to Africa, most of the time Africa is far away, as Marina said, always complicated. And that is when also the involvement of the international community, when I talk about the international community, I give the example of the Khartoum processes happening here in Europe, where they give money to the militia to push back the refugees and immigration, the border control. And that is one of the things we have been protesting, and we have been speaking about it, and we have been highlighting that is this money will fall in back in us, and this money can be also kill Sudanese and happening. Recently that you can see that this is RSF and other militias in Sudan was being funded by the alliance from different countries. And one of the things that is in 2012 when the Khartoum process, it was a huge debate about it, that is Sudanese will be against that, and we are really raising our voices, but unfortunately nobody hears us. And the outcome is, you can see today, many of the Sudanese have been displaced inside the country, some of them being lost, some of them being kidnapped, and most of them being refugees in the neighboring countries. And this money helps the people who to buy guns and killing us. And then the shame that the international community, they don't like to take it. They don't like to say, yes, we are part of what's happening, especially in Sudan. This is why it's making the interest of different countries in Europe towards Sudan, because of the resources, because of also cross-cutting relations, and also cross-cutting relations with the allies who are supporting Sudan, like Emirates and others. That is making it complicated, and also the space for us as Sudanese to speak loudly, it has been pushed downwards because of other conflict around the world, and people was focusing in that. Sudan conflict is really, has become like a devastated. And every day we are being facing a lot of conflict, a lot of problems, a lot of news that happening from different areas, attacks, but none of people who's in Europe talking about it. When we speak about it, they say, okay, we don't have capacity to support Sudan. And that has come to me directly because of my weakness that by myself in 2014, when I started to have the movies, it's called Forgotten Voices, it's come out of anger, out of also disappointing when I risk and sending a lot of emails around, knocking different doors for support. People, they said, we don't have capacity for Sudan because we are focusing in that time in Turkey or in Ukraine or in Gaza. This is why it has become complicated. And also as civil society, German civil society has no will to move and to see what's going on in Africa, in Togo, in Sudan, in Senegal. They're focusing, and sometimes people they say Africa is far away. Yes, it's far away when coming to conflict, but it's not far away when coming for holidays.